G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the pub test, and we are looking at the crime scene of Elizabeth Stride. Now, this one is absolutely fascinating because there is so much contradictory material here that it's really hard to know what happened. So we're just going to stick to what was stated officially, and then we're probably going to have a quick look at the Catherine Eddowes crime scene, and then we are going to look at some of this evidence a little bit critically in some future videos, because this will introduce quite a few new people that have not yet been mentioned in this series. A couple of police officers, a couple of eyewitnesses, and we're going to look at some of these in greater detail to see where they really fit into this Jack the Ripper saga. And trust me, one of them, on the surface, you just discount, but when you really look into it, it is a little bit eye-opening. Now, that's enough with that. What actually happened on that night of September the 30th, 1888, in Dutfield's Yard down Burner Street, when Lewis, I believe it's Lewis, though he's pronounced and said his name a few different ways in his life, but Louis Diemschutz. If I've said that wrong, then I apologize, and if I say it differently 10 times, I also apologize, but I'm going to run with that for now. Now, he was bringing his horse and cart into this yard. Now, he actually had quite a lot to do with the building attached to that yard. In fact, he lived in that building. He basically ran the International Working Men's Education Society. Now, he finds the body, goes inside to his club, brings people out, gets the police turn up, and that's the end of the story. Well, let's back up the track here and look at what happened at the inquest. Now, this inquest spanned a couple of weeks, mainly because there was more evidence that they wanted to dig into. Now, the first three people at the inquest gave an affirmation that they would tell the truth. They weren't sworn in, as in they didn't put their hand on the Bible. Now, I didn't know that was an option to you back then in the United Kingdom in the 1880s. I just thought you would have had to, or you might have been taken off and burnt at a stake or something. I don't know what it was like, but that little bit of information surprised me. But why these blokes didn't swear on the Bible also I find surprising, but that's a story for another video. But the first bloke said he worked at a printery attached to this building. He lived elsewhere, but he was also a member of this club, and I believe his name was William West. Now, William West's testimony is interesting to set the scene. The coroner asked, well, what is this International Working Men's Education Society? How do you become a part of it? So he says, well, you got to get recommended by a current member, and then you get seconded, and then you're basically into this club. And the coroner says, well, is it political? And William West says, yes, it's a socialist club. So to get invited in, you would have to subscribe to the socialist ideology, which at the time was really on the rise in the United Kingdom. It had taken over a fair bit of Eastern Europe, but now the working man, the person who was working for these big companies, either farms or royalty or in industry now in the cities, they're saying, well, hang on, where's my shorty morty? I want some wealth. I deserve some of this money. And so the social idea that this money should be shared was really gaining popularity among the common people. And so this club also was full of a lot of immigrants, ones that have come from other countries but have now made their home here in Whitechapel. And this yard, where Elizabeth Stride was found, was often an entryway into the back area of this club. So the coroner does ask, look, could you have seen into that yard? And he says, well, it's dark down there. You're not going to see much. But just remember, it's used by people walking in and out. So the front door was, but so was this back area. And then the coroner says, well, could you have heard anything? Like, was it noisy in the club that night? And William West says, no, it's pretty quiet. Though when I went down to the yard, I did hear some singing from the building. So it just seemed like a normal night. Nothing out of the ordinary. The next person interviewed at the inquest was a bloke called Morris Eagle. Now, he said that he went to the front door of the club. It was closed, so he went round into the yard and gained access that way. So the coroner says, well, did you see anything in the yard? He says, no. He says, well, if a man and a woman were in the yard, would you have seen that? And he said, well, I would have. And it was also, well, what took you to the club that night? He said, well, I was walking past and I heard a bloke singing in Russian, and that's my mother tongue, and so I went up to sing with him. And then I got disturbed by someone running in saying there's a woman dead in the yard, so I went downstairs. So I struck the match, saw this woman lying there and noticed the blood, and then I called for the police. Yet, it's safe to say the police had already been called for. Now, here comes Louis Diemschutz, who gets interviewed next. Now, he gives his address as living here at 40 Burner Street with his wife at this club, and he says that he leaves his horse and cart at George's Yard in Cable Street. That detail, remember, for a couple of videos' time, but I won't digress into it just yet. But the coroner says, well, what did you do with your horse and cart when you found the body? He says, well, I left it in the yard. But then I went in to find the wife, so I found her, and then I informed other people of the club, and then I ran off to get the police. Now, in saying that he ran off to get to the police, he didn't find any police straight away, so he's running down the street calling, police, police. But he'd already met another bloke in Grove Street, he said, who followed him and came with him. But he actually said when he got back to the yard with this other bloke, it was at that very instant that Morris Eagle and a police constable appeared at the same time to look at the body. And he is asked, could anyone have entered that yard and not touched the body? He says, yeah, absolutely they could have. Then he's asked, could anyone have walked through that yard and not seen the body? He says, well, I may have not have seen it if it wasn't for me horse. He's also asked, could anyone have left the yard or even the building before the police turned up? And he says, of course they could have. They could have easily have got out. Except after I informed the members, because then he's saying no one would have left or been able to leave. But the coroner has some different questions for the police. But it was October the 2nd that Constable Lamb is interviewed, and his testimony is quite fascinating as well. Because to start with, he says he gets there, finds the body, there was quite a large commotion going on. And the coroner said, was the front door to that building locked? And he said, no, it wasn't. It was a bit busy at the time. The coroner sort of chipped him a little and said, look, time would have been a very important thing and you should have locked the door. But PC Lamb says, well, look, everything was under control. No one left. Everybody got searched. Everybody's details got taken. Even though it was shown that if someone even had still been in that yard around the little outhouses and dust room, they could have easily got away anyway. And I think it's safe to say anyone could have entered or left that yard without anybody noticing if there was a large commotion going on. But he was also asked, what was the last time you went down Burner Street that night? He says, well, that actually wasn't on my beat. I was about up round Commercial Road and I walked past it, but about 6 to 7 minutes prior. And remembering Louis Diemschutz ran around and couldn't find a policeman, though where was the policeman on that particular beat? But then it's asked about lighting, saying, well, look, what was the lighting like in the yard? He says it was pretty dark. What about down Burner Street itself? And one of the jury says there's 7 lights down Burner Street. It's well lit. And PC Lamb says, well, actually there was only 3. And those 3 were up the other end of the street. Now, whether there was 7 installed and only 3 working, that's a possibility. But even the coroner made note that London at the time was one of the most dimly lit capitals in the world. And there was a huge issue going on about lighting, because it was expensive to keep street lights running. So I think it's safe to say what the policeman said was true, that that street, particularly down that end, wasn't brightly lit. The next person was Edward Spooner, and he says he was outside the Beehive pub. He'd just left another pub that had closed off Commercial Road, and then two Jews, and these are his words that are recorded in the official records, two Jews running down the road screaming murder and police. They ran past him, and then they're on their way back. They still haven't found a policeman, by the way. But he stops them and says, what on earth are you guys doing? And they said, well, there's someone been murdered. So he goes, well, I'm coming along to have a look. And he hoofs it down there. He turns up with Lewis Diemschutz, the constable, and Eagle from the club. But apparently, he inspects the body, is what he says. So where was PC Lamb at this stage? Because they've all got back there together. So it's very contradictory what's being mentioned here, but he says, no, the body had not been touched at all. And I think it was the foreman of the jury then made the comment that, well, that's because Jews don't like touching dead bodies. Now, if all these people were Jewish in that club, that may explain why they didn't swear in on the Bible, because they might not have agreed with half of it that they were swearing to if it was a King James version, which I guess you'd have in London at the time. But I'm going to question that in a couple of videos about whether they were actually Jewish, but we will look into it. But an interesting question is asked of Edward Spooner, saying, well, look, when you examined the body, because you lifted the chin, apparently, was any blood found on your hands? Were you inspected before you left the yard? He says, yes, I was, by the police and by the doctor. And there was no blood found on your hands? The answer being no, and so then they determined, well, there must have been no blood on Elizabeth Stride's chin. Now, a lot of testimony was given to identify Elizabeth Stride, or Long Liz, as she was mentioned quite often in this coroner's inquest. But there was also a second person who came and said it wasn't Elizabeth Stride, it was someone else. And that someone else actually turned up on the last day or the second last day of the inquest and said, I'm very much alive. I don't know what that person was banging on about. It soon got worked out that the person in Dutfield's yard definitely was Elizabeth Stride, or Long Liz, as she was known. An interesting little detail came up during this inquest. And that was the discovery of a knife wrapped in a handkerchief. Now, this bloke walking down the road called Thomas Coram, I'll get the pronunciation on that later because we are going to look into this in great detail. But he found a knife. And PC Drag, I'll also get the pronunciation on that right later, but he is also at the inquest. So you got Thomas and you got this constable talking about the discovery of a knife and whether or not it could have been the knife used on Elizabeth Stride, but knowing that another attack happened not very far away and not long after this one. And we'll be looking at that, as I said, in greater detail in a video to come. And sadly, with all this commotion going on and everyone running from every which way to Dutfield's yard, 40 Burner Street, to see this event, it left very little police on the street for what happened to Catherine Eddowes. And we'll look at her crime scene in the next video. So let me know what you think of this one. This is just a quick overall summary of the Elizabeth Stride crime scene and who was there, what was seen and what was said. We are going to unpack that in great detail after we look at the Catherine Eddowes crime scene itself. The reason for that is not only because that they were close together and on the same night, but many of these people could have been at both scenes or had something to do with them in some way. So look out for that next one and then get ready for one of the craziest videos done in this series so far. I don't want to give too much away, but let me tell you, when I first heard of it, I thought it was nuts. I looked into it and still think that it's nuts, but there could be some merit to some of the arguments. And I'll be interested to see what you think of that one when we get to it. But that's not the next video, it's the one after. But thank you very much for watching. All of your support is genuinely appreciated. Whether you're commenting and giving me all the information, whether you're just viewing silently, that's great too. If you really want to help us out, give that subscribe button a smash. I'm Owen, you've been watching the Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.